Greek mythology is responsible for some of the most enduring stories in all of history. The pantheon of gods sitting atop Mount Olympus, the underworld, land of the dead, guarded by a multi-headed dog, and don't forget the many monsters, the Minotaur, stalking through the labyrinth, the sirens luring sailors to their death with their beautiful songs, and of course the woman with hair made of serpents whose gaze can turn a man to stone. Medusa is quite possibly one of the most famous monsters in the mythological world. You've almost certainly heard of her, seen her referenced in some sort of movie or TV show, but what is the real story behind the snake-haired woman? Grab your sword and shield and try not to make eye contact, because today we're digging into the legend of Medusa the Gorgon. According to the myths, Medusa was not the only Gorgon. She had two sisters, all of them daughters of the sea gods Phorkys and Kito, who dwelled at the very edge of the world. The writer Hesiod described it as beyond glorious ocean in the frontier land towards night, where there are clear-voiced Hesperides. The Hesperides were sky goddesses associated with the evening and guardianship of golden apples. The Gorgons, with their intimidating wingspans, sharp talons, and hair made of snakes, were quite different from these gentle guardians. Their names were Medusa, Stheno, and Euryale. Stheno's name means strong and forceful, while Euryale's means broad. Depending on the story, the blood of the Gorgons was said to have poisonous or healing properties. Those odds don't seem great, but if you happen to find yourself in possession of some Gorgon blood, then why not flip a coin? The Gorgons have been part of Greek mythology since before the 7th or 8th century BCE, when Hesiod wrote about them in Theogony. It's theorized that they were the result of Near Eastern mythological and artistic influences on ancient Greek culture. Early depictions of the Gorgons, when they had a more bestial appearance with thick hair and tusks, looked notably similar to those of Lamashtu, a Mesopotamian demon known for stealing children and attacking pregnant women. Over time, depictions of the Gorgons shifted to become more human in nature, but some monstrous elements remained as they became the creatures we imagine when we hear the word Gorgon today. Their imagery is frightening, intimidating, and iconic. Open mouths, wide, wild eyes, and twisting crowns of snakes. And no Gorgon is more recognizable than Medusa herself. While the other Gorgons were immortals with monstrous features, Medusa was quite different. She was mortal, a lonely fate when her siblings would never grow old or die. But where they were hideous to behold, she was beautiful. Her looks and feminine charms captivated all who knew her, and her most stunning attribute was her lush, splendid hair. But not all attention is welcome attention, and Medusa captured the eye of a lustful god, Poseidon. Brother of Zeus and the god of the sea, Poseidon boldly pursued the mortal girl, but she rejected his advances out of devotion to the goddess Athena, whom she hoped to serve as a priestess someday. But gods don't like to take no for an answer, and one day in the temple of Athena herself, Poseidon forced himself on Medusa. Athena was horrified and enraged at the desecration of her sacred temple, and she sought revenge not on Poseidon, her uncle, and the one who had abused his power, but on Medusa. Athena transformed her into a monster, changing her hair to snakes and her face to a visage so hideous that any who met her eyes would be petrified and turned to stone. She returned to her sisters, joining them in their isolation and fleeing from society, but she was beset by would-be heroes intending to slay her and cut off her head. Eventually, one succeeded, but we'll get to that a little bit later. First, we have to address something a few of you watching might have been listening to the story of Medusa and thinking, "Hey, that's not how I heard it." And that's entirely possible. There are several variations on the Medusa myth that have circulated over the years, some popularized by different ancient poets, some just resulting from the way stories shift and change over the years after hundreds of retellings. The earliest mentions of Medusa describe her as a monster quite like her sisters, born monstrous, rather than made that way. Over time, more emotion and drama was woven into the story. The poet Hesiod described Medusa's fate as a sad one, her mortality tragic alongside the immortality of her sisters. In Hesiod's version of the story, Poseidon and Medusa had a consensual love affair, and he lay with her in a soft meadow and among spring flowers. A gentler, more romantic take on Medusa compared to what came before or after. A century after Hesiod, the poet Stasinus of Cyprus wrote about Medusa and her sisters. He described them as fearful monsters who lived in Sarpedon, a rocky island in deep eddying Oceanus. Later, the Greek playwright Aeschylus would expand on the monstrous appearance of the Gorgons, writing of three-winged sisters, the snake-haired Gorgons, loathed of mankind, whom no one of mortal kind shall look upon and still draw breath. It is the Roman poet Ovid who might be responsible for the most commonly repeated version of the Medusa myth. He described her fate in his work. She was once most beautiful, and the jealous aspiration of many suitors. Of all her beauties, none was more admired than her hair. I came across a man who recalled having seen her. They say that Neptune, lord of the seas, violated her in the temple of Minerva. Jupiter's daughter turned away and hid her chaste eyes behind her aegis. So that it might not go unpunished, she changed the Gorgon's hair to foul snakes. And now, to terrify her enemies, numbing them with fear, the goddess wears the snakes that she created as a breastplate. One thing all the Medusa myths have in common is her death at the hands of the hero Perseus. The story of Perseus began when Acrisius, the king of Argos, was warned by the Oracle of Delphi that his grandson would one day kill him. Since he didn't yet have any grandchildren, he set about making sure that he never would. He locked his daughter Danae in an underground room where she would never become pregnant. But walls, locked doors, and a secret underground chamber are no match for Zeus, the god of thunder and unofficial god of infidelity. Zeus took a shine to Danae and decided to visit her in the form of a shower of golden rain. Stop right there, don't say it, get your mind out of the gutter. Yes, he came to Danae as a shower of gold, bypassing the walls of her chamber and entering her body. When the shower had passed, she was pregnant. She eventually gave birth to a son named Perseus. Furious that his daughter had managed to conceive a grandson, and not believing that Zeus was the father, Acrisius sent his daughter and newborn grandson out into the open sea on a ship. They drifted for a while before landing on the shores of Seriphos Island, where a local couple rescued them. They weren't just any ordinary couple either. The husband was the brother of the island's king, Polydectes. When Perseus grew up, becoming a strong, handsome young man, he attracted the ire of King Polydectes. Polydectes wanted to marry Danae, but didn't see a way to pull off that union with her son around. See, Danae didn't want to marry him, and Perseus protected her from his unwanted advances. So the king hatched a plan. He would send Perseus away and make sure that he would never come back. Polydectes threw a royal banquet at which each and every guest was required to bring him a gift. For his gift from Perseus, he asked him to journey to the lair of Medusa to slay her and bring him back her head. In Polydectes' eyes, this task was as good as a death sentence, but Perseus promised to complete the quest and return victorious with the Gorgon's head in hand. He was in luck too. Athena, ever eager for a chance to help Medusa suffer and for the chance to help out her demigod half-brother, offered guidance to Perseus. She instructed him to find the Hesperides, who would be able to tell him the location of Medusa and her sisters. Before he could locate the Hesperides, Perseus would need to pay a visit to the Graiae, the sisters of the Gorgons, 3 gray-haired women sharing one single eye between them. He was able to get the better of them by stealing their eye, holding it hostage, and promising to return it in exchange for the location of the Hesperides. When he reached the Hesperides, they offered to help him in the form of a special bag he could use to carry Medusa's head without being harmed by it. Then several of the gods contributed gifts that would aid him with his quest. Athena gave him a polished shield, Zeus offered an unbreakable sickle, Hades gifted him a helmet that gave him the ability to turn invisible, and Hermes gave him a pair of winged sandals. Armed with the favor of the gods and the hidden location of the Gorgon's cave, Perseus prepared to take on Medusa. When Perseus arrived at the cave, he found Medusa sleeping. Using the polished face of the shield he received from Athena, he was able to look at Medusa's reflection, observing her without being turned to stone. Then, using the unbreakable sword, he sliced off Medusa's head. From her bleeding wound, the famous winged horse Pegasus and his brother Chrysaor were born. With the helmet of invisibility keeping him hidden from view, Perseus threw Medusa's head into the bag and fled. But Perseus' journey wasn't over just yet. On the way back home, he passed through Ethiopia, where he spotted a beautiful young woman bound to a rock, waiting for a sea monster to rise up and swallow her whole. This was, as he learned, the doing of Poseidon, a punishment for the queen of Ethiopia's vanity. Andromeda would pay the price for her mother's choice to proclaim herself more beautiful than the daughters of Nereus. In exchange for Andromeda's hand in marriage, Perseus slayed the monster, Chethos, and freed her. The two were married, but the union was interrupted by Andromeda's uncle, who was originally supposed to marry her. Ew. Perseus defeated the lecherous uncle by holding up Medusa's head, turning him into stone. After all this trial and tribulation, it was time for Perseus to return home and offer the king his gift. When he arrived, he learned that Polydectes had continued his predatory pursuit of Danae in his absence. Enough was enough, and Perseus confronted the king in his palace, holding up the head of Medusa for him to see. Polydectes turned to stone, face frozen in shock forever. But wait, did Perseus ever kill his grandfather? He did, but it was an accident. Sometime later, while participating in a series of athletic games, he threw a discus that hit an old man and killed him. That old man was the grandfather he never knew. But enough about Perseus. What happened to Medusa? Yeah, she died, but what happened after that? Though she was no longer living, she made her mark on the land throughout Perseus' journey home. As Perseus flew over the North African desert, using the winged shoes gifted him by Hermes, Medusa's blood began to leak from the satchel, falling onto the sands and creating venomous snakes. When Perseus stopped to rest at the shoreline of the Red Sea, her blood dripped into the water, transforming into hard red coral. As for the fate of Medusa's head, Perseus presented it as an offering to Athena in thanks for her aid during the journey. She placed the head on her shield, her aegis, using it as an offensive as well as a defensive weapon. It protected her, but it now could also turn her opponents to stone. Now seems like an appropriate time to mention that the name Medusa means protector. Medusa is far from the only female figure in Greek mythology with a touch of the serpentine about her. There are her sisters, of course, but it goes beyond the Gorgons. In many Greek myths, Lamia was a beautiful woman, either the daughter of a king or the daughter of Poseidon, and the mother of the sea monster Scylla. Either way, she was beautiful. Beautiful enough to catch the eye of the god of thunder and the infamous philanderer, Zeus. He seduced her, and she bore several of his children. Well, as you can imagine, Hera didn't take kindly to this. You might expect her to get used to Zeus's affairs after a while, but she had a real talent for wrath. And she, depending on the version of the myth, either killed off all of Lamia's children, except for Celia, or forced Lamia to kill her own children. Either way, Lamia was driven mad with grief, becoming obsessed with stealing and killing children. Over time, her rage and hatred turned her into a monster, transforming her into a hideous creature, half woman, half serpent. Zeus decided to do something to ease her pain. Did he bring her children back? No, of course not. But he did give her the gift of prophecy and the ability to pluck out her eyes at will and replace them. Oh gee, thanks, that really makes up for all the horrible tragedy. There is another female serpent monster in the Greek myths, the daughter of the sea gods Phorkys and Keto. Her name is derived from the Greek word for viper. In Hesiod's writing, he described her den as a cave deep down under a hollow rock, far from the deathless gods and mortal men. Hesiod also wrote descriptions of her appearance: half a nymph with glancing eyes and fair cheeks, and half again a huge snake, great and awful with speckled skin, eating raw flesh beneath the secret parts of the holy earth. She was the mother of many of Greek mythology's most iconic monsters, including Cerberus, the many-headed dog that guards the underworld, the Chimera, a hybrid lion-goat-snake, and the Hydra, the many-headed beast eventually slain by Hercules. Women who are part snake are not limited to Greek mythology. There are different versions of serpentine women from all over the world. One striking example is the Japanese Nure Onna, or wet woman. Once again, get your mind out of the gutter. The name refers to her preferred habitat along the coasts, riverbeds, and in and around various bodies of water. It also refers to the fact that they always appear dripping wet, as if they've freshly emerged from beneath the surface of their watery home. The Nure Onna are vampiric sea serpents lurking around bodies of water, waiting for unsuspecting humans to wander by so they can drain them of their blood and eat them. The story is thought to originate from the Iwami region of the Shimane prefecture, and there are two variations on the creature. One looks like an enormous sea serpent with the head of a human woman, and the other is the same but with humanoid arms as well. Both variations have long black hair drenched with water and forked tongues. She doesn't turn her victims to stone with a glance, nor does she use her inhuman physical strength to simply destroy them right away. Instead, the most common versions of the story have Nure Onna using trickery to ensnare her prey. A Nure Onna will appear on the coast or riverbank disguised as an ordinary woman in a state of distress, carrying a baby bundled up in a cloth. She'll beg for help from passersby. When they draw closer, she asks them to hold her baby and allow her to rest. If the victim accepts the baby into their arms, it will become heavier and heavier, weighing them down until they're unable to move. Then she's able to attack and feed. Medusa can be seen throughout ancient Greek art. Her face painted on ceramics, sculpted from stone, smelted from metal. According to Madeline Glennon of the Department of Greek and Roman Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Medusa's face functioned much like the modern evil eye. She was a protective symbol, something dangerous that would repel other dangers, keeping other evils away. The association likely contributed to the popularity of her image in art. The Gorgonion, the head and face of Medusa, appears frequently in temple decorations from the Archaic period. In these depictions, she is hideous and beastly. Then, in the Hellenistic era, her visage morphs into that of a beautiful, though still inhuman woman. Medusa's impact on art has persisted beyond ancient Greece. In 1554, Cellini sculpted a bronze statue depicting Perseus's moment of victory just after beheading her. He stands over her body, holding her severed head in the air. This was intended to represent the power of the Medici family over the people of Florence. Other artists at the time courted the favor of the Medicis with Medusa imagery. Caravaggio painted Medusa's moment of defeat onto his ceremonial shield, again capturing the image of the powerful creature's defeat. During the French Revolution, Medusa became a symbol of a political movement. Jacobin rebels used her image as an emblem of French liberty, linking her power with anti-establishment action. Medusa inspired more modern poets than Hesiod and Ovid, lighting a creative fire in Percy Shelley. He penned On the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci in the Florentine Gallery, a tribute that includes lines such as "'Tis the melodious hue of beauty thrown athwart the darkness and the glare of pain, which humanize and harmonize the strain," and "A woman's countenance with serpent locks, gazing in death on heaven from those wet rocks." Shelley described Medusa in the language of a tragic, beautiful woman lost to torture and death. Other writers expanded on the idea of a misunderstood Medusa. In the 1975 manifesto, The Laugh of the Medusa, feminist theorist Hélène Cixous used Medusa as a jumping-off point to discuss women's bodies, the fear of female desire, and the value of women telling their own stories. "You only have to look at the Medusa straight on to see her," she wrote, "and she's not deadly, she's beautiful, and she's laughing." Other prominent cultural voices had different opinions on what Medusa could represent. In 1940, Sigmund Freud's writing Medusa's Head was published after his death. In Freud's eyes, decapitation could be compared to castration, and therefore the fear of Medusa could be linked to a fear of castration. Linked to the sight of something, he continued, "Numerous analyses have made us familiar with the occasion for this. It occurs when a boy who has hitherto been unwilling to believe the threat of castration catches sight of the female genitals, probably those of an adult, surrounded by hair and essentially those of his mother." Honestly, that seems like a bit of a stretch. Also, it should be noted that Medusa was the one who was decapitated in the myth, so that whole castration metaphor does begin to fall apart a bit there. Today, Medusa remains a compelling character, explored again and again in art and culture, from Dungeons & Dragons to God of War to Percy Jackson and the Olympians. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and artists continue to portray her and Gorgons in a wide variety of ways. Sometimes she is the unfeeling monster, the dangerous beauty. Other times, a tragic villain, the victim of a curse that she didn't ask for or deserve. She terrifies us, she wards off evil, she excites and intrigues us in every form. For a being whose gaze is meant to be avoided at all costs, none of us seem to be able to look away. The tales of Greek mythology are full of gods and goddesses mingling with mortals and interfering with their lives, sometimes by introducing legendary objects that wield unimaginable power. From a Medusa head that turns you into stone to a golden apple that started a war. But the most famous object of all of Greek mythology is a simple box? Why is this seemingly dull box so famous? To answer this and more, we need to start with a woman named Pandora. You've probably heard at least a few references to Pandora's box in your lifetime, generally when referring to something that is better off left alone. But there's more to the story than just a woman and a box. Pandora as a mythic figure originated in the works of the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, first in his poem Theogony, then later on in his work Works and Days. Though Pandora was not referenced by name in Theogony, there is a female figure depicted in the poem thought to be Pandora. She was, according to this poem, created on the orders of Zeus as a punishment for humanity in response to the actions of Prometheus. Before we can explore Pandora further, we first have to understand what exactly Zeus was trying to punish humanity for. What exactly did Prometheus do that upset the king of the gods, the ruler of the sky and thunder, so deeply? Prometheus was the son of the titan Iapetus and one of the Oceanid nymphs, either Clymene or Asia depending on the story. As you might imagine, things were a bit contentious between mortals and immortals in the early days of humanity. One of the many sources of conflict between the two was the possession of fire. Zeus withdrew the gift of fire from humans as a punishment after Prometheus tricked him into accepting a sacrificial offering that looked appealing on the surface but was in fact just the bones of a bull. This was intended to allow the humans to keep the meat for themselves, while only offering the part of the bull that was inedible to the gods. If you're familiar with how Zeus acted in Greek mythology, you could probably guess what happened next. Zeus really didn't take kindly to being tricked, so as punishment he hid fire from humanity. Well, Prometheus wasn't about to leave humans shivering in the dark with no way to cook their food or heat themselves. Using a fennel stalk to hide the flame, he stole fire back from Zeus and returned it to the mortals. Zeus was furious and took out every ounce of his rage on Prometheus. He sentenced the immortal god to a fate worse than death. He was bound with chains across a rock, and every day an eagle, which also happened to be one of Zeus's messengers, would come and eat his liver. Every night his liver would grow back, and the nightmarish cycle would start over again. Prometheus would eventually be freed from his torment by the Greek hero Heracles, or Hercules, but we guess he probably had a bit of a rough time when he was chained to that rock. So what does Pandora have to do with this lurid tale of fire, deceit, and liver-eating birds? In her first appearance in Theogony, she was created as the result of Zeus's determination to punish mankind by any means necessary. Note the choice of words there, mankind. We'll get back to that. In an act of retribution, Zeus ordered Hephaestus, the god of artisans and blacksmiths, to use earth to craft the world's first human woman. She would be beautiful but evil, and her descendants would bring untold suffering on the human race. As Hesiod put it, "For from her is the race of woman and female kind. Of her is the deadly race and tribe of women who live amongst mortal men to their great trouble. No help meets in hateful poverty, but only in wealth." Oh boy, with that kind of attitude, we're sure Hesiod was popular with the ladies back in Athens. But Hesiod wasn't finished with his sexist takes on women yet, nor was he content to only explore, at this time, nameless women in Theogony. He brought her back in his poem Works and Days, where he expanded the myth of the first woman into the version most often repeated today. In this telling, she receives a series of gifts from the gods, each contributing something to her final form. Hephaestus molded her from the earth. Athena taught her weaving and needlework, and Aphrodite shed grade upon her head and cruel longing and cares that weary the limbs, which honestly sounds like the goddess of love gave her depression. Hermes gave her a shameless mind and a deceitful nature, as well as the power to speak. More specifically, he gave her the power to lie and use crafty words. Side note, which ancient Greek girl do we think broke Hesiod's heart? Because his storytelling seems somewhat one-sided in its interpretation of the sexes. Anyway, Athena gave her clothing, Pytho, goddess of persuasion, and the Graces draped her in necklaces and jewels, and the Hore, goddesses of the seasons, placed a crown woven from plants upon her head. Talk about drip. To top it all off, Hermes gave her a name, Pandora, meaning all gifts. As Hesiod wrote, "All they who dwelt on Olympus gave each a gift, a plague to men who eat bread." Good news for the gluten-free men out there. So when does that box come in? Well, along with the creation of Pandora, Zeus bestowed upon her a mysterious box, the contents of which were a secret to anyone but him. We should also mention that Pandora wasn't just a gift to humanity, but also to Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus. Prometheus warned his brother not to take anything Zeus offered him, but being the hard-headed brother he was, Epimetheus welcomed the beautiful Pandora as his wife and let her bring the box along too. Pretty soon after she opened that box, and all manner of evil things flooded out, filling the earth and sea. Only one entity was left inside. Hope remained there in an unbreakable home within under the rim of the great jar, and did not fly out of the door, for ere that the lid of the jar stopped her by the will of Aegeus holding Zeus who gathers the clouds. Wait a minute, didn't that just say jar? That's right, Pandora's box was never a box in the first place. The word for the vessel that Pandora was given was pithos, which refers to a large clay jar used primarily for storage. It often held wine, oil, or grain. It also could be used in burial practices, and some were believed to contain souls. Historians believe the word must have been mistranslated at some point as box, and that just kinda caught on. The mistranslation is frequently attributed to Erasmus, the 16th century humanist, though other historians have pointed their fingers at the 16th century Italian poet Giulio Gregorio Giraldi. Wherever the mistranslation started, the end result was the same. Pythos became pyxis, the word for casket, which eventually became box. To be fair, we think Pandora's box does sound a bit more epic and mysterious compared to Pandora's jar. This linguistic change might seem small, but some scholars believe that it takes away from the larger meaning of the story. For example, Jane Ellen Harrison, a British scholar of classics, believes that the shift from jar to box erased some of Pandora's inherent connection to the earth and the dirt. The jar would have been made from earth and clay, just like Pandora herself. Though Hesiod's version was the first and the most well-known one, other versions of the myth do exist. In some, Pandora desperately tried to stop the evils from escaping the jar, slamming the lid shut, but much too late. By the time she got it closed, the only thing left inside the jar was hope. leaving the world full of evils and hopelessness. This is a bit different from Hesiod's version of Pandora, who was deliberately deceitful and wicked. In these versions, Pandora is innocent, deliberately tempted by Zeus and the other gods with the gift of a vessel she is warned never to open. Her curiosity gets the better of her, and all of humanity suffers as a result. In these versions, the moral of the story shifts from "you can't escape the wrath of the gods" to "curiosity killed the cat," the killing being done by the wrath of the gods, of course. There are other versions of the story as well, some that take the blame off of Pandora's shoulders entirely. Artists like Anton Tischbein and Sebastian Leclerc painted depictions of the myth in which Pandora's husband Epimetheus opened the jar. Speaking of Epimetheus, he and Pandora had a daughter, one who also experienced the wrath of Zeus firsthand. Pyrrha was married to Deucalion, the son of Prometheus. When Zeus decided to bring the current age of man to an end, he created a massive storm to flood the entire world. Luckily, Prometheus, Pyrrha's father-in-law and uncle, saw the flood coming. He instructed Deucalion to build an ark where he and Pyrrha could wait out the storm. Wow, that sure sounds familiar. We'll come back to that later. Deucalion and Pyrrha managed to survive the flood, their ark landing on Mount Parnassus after the waters receded. But they were the only two humans that managed to make it. Somehow, someway, the two of them would need to repopulate the entire planet, so they came up with a plan. Get your mind out of the gutter, nothing like that happened. Instead, they just went to an oracle to talk about it. The oracle instructed Deucalion to throw the bones of his mother behind his shoulder. These instructions were not literal, instead referring to rocks or the bones of Gaia, Mother Earth. Deucalion and Pyrrha did what anyone would do in the situation. They started throwing rocks. As soon as each rock touched the ground, it would transform into a human being. The rocks thrown by Deucalion became men, the rocks thrown by Pyrrha became women. So while Pandora was meant to bring about the destruction of humanity, it was her daughter along with Deucalion who brought it back from the brink of extinction. Where Pandora destroyed, intentionally or not, Pyrrha created. And both of them were forced to deal with Zeus and his grudge against humanity. It should be noted that while Pandora's box was actually a pithos, there is another Greek myth featuring a box that punished the person for opening it. In the story of Psyche, a beautiful mortal woman and the beloved of Eros, Aphrodite's son and the god of desire, Aphrodite put her through a series of trials. These were difficult tasks intended to punish Psyche for her relationship with Eros, including gathering water from the river Styx. For her final task, Psyche was presented with a golden box that she was to take to the underworld and bring to Persephone. There, she would fill the box with a bit of Persephone's beauty and deliver it back to Aphrodite. After successfully journeying to the underworld, Psyche found Persephone and shared Aphrodite's request. Happy to help Aphrodite, Persephone filled the box. Then, as Psyche made her way back to complete her errand for the goddess, she became consumed with curiosity about the box's contents. Wanting to take a quick look for herself, she opened the box to sneak a peek at the beauty inside. However, there was no beauty to be found. Instead, there was just a dark cloud that overwhelmed her, plunging her into a deep coma-like sleep from which only a god could wake her. Some scholars believe that part of the transition from Pandora's jar to a box was due to the stories of Pandora and Psyche getting mixed up, and the two vessels being conflated with one another. There are significant differences between the two myths, however, so it's difficult to see how that confusion would have occurred. When it comes to the spread of myths and the way in which they shift and change over the centuries, it can be difficult to pinpoint where exactly the changes come from. Since Hesiod first wrote about Pandora, her story's been retold and reimagined countless times in countless artistic mediums. Many European artists such as Paolo Farinati and Marco Angelo de Moro depicted Pandora in one way or another. Dante Gabriel Rossetti notably depicted Pandora clad in red robes, holding the box in her hands with an ambiguous expression. Famous Belgian surrealist René Magritte painted a seemingly unrelated image of a man looking out at a street scene with the title Pandora's Box. Pandora's Box was a popular subject in the world of theater as well, with 3 French plays produced under the same title of Pandora's Box, all in the first half of the 18th century. These focused far less on Pandora herself and far more on the evils let loose on the world when the box was opened. The first of these plays, produced in 1721, was a commedia dell'arte style piece which in a happy village is disrupted by vices including greed, envy, and hatred. The second, produced in 1729 and written by Philippe Poisson, features Mercury, the Roman version of Hermes, interviewing the evils that are about to be unleashed. These include old age, migraine, destitution, hatred, envy, paralysis, fever, and transport. The third play of the bunch was written by Pierre Brumoy and produced in 1743. Unlike the others, it came with a subtitle, Curiosity Punished. This three-act comedy is set in the house of Epimetheus, where Mercury delivers the box. This box contains 7 flatterers: honors, pleasures, riches, gaming or gambling, taste, fashion, and false knowledge. It also contains the 7 evils: envy, remorse, avarice, poverty, scorn, ignorance, and inconstancy. At the end of the play, hope arrives to save the day. In these interpretations of the story, Pandora is barely involved at all. The blame is instead placed on the gods who have chosen to torment humanity and on the vices themselves that are the root of that suffering. The myth has overall been difficult to interpret, inviting different readings depending on the individual scholar or the cultural context they come from, and at the time at which it's interpreted. We'd like to throw our hat into the ring and give a bit of our own interpretation and speculation, so let's quickly look at the interesting connection that we alluded to earlier. There's another famous mythical story, which includes the world's first woman unleashing evil on mankind, the biblical story of Eve, who ate the apple from the tree of knowledge and got herself and Adam evicted from the Garden of Eden. There could be a reason for this overlap, as some scholars suggest that theogony could have been based on the ancient Mesopotamian stories, which may have also been a source for the story of Adam and Eve. However, it's also entirely possible that the two stories emerged independently. We'll let you decide in the comments below. Like Zeus's thunderclouds, let's get ready to rumble. Today we're taking a look at the most powerful Greek gods you might not have heard of, the ones only the true connoisseurs will know. Number 20. Iris. Most people tend to picture Hermes when you think of the messenger of the gods. And that's fair. The master of speed and looking cool in winged shoes is practically the Amazon Prime of Olympus. But there's actually another messenger god, or rather goddess, Iris, who also serves as the goddess of the rainbow and acts as a messenger in several texts, including the Iliad. In the work of Hesiod, she also has the solemn responsibility of carrying water from the river Styx to deliver whenever a god wanted to take an oath. Still, in spite of her responsibilities and how cool rainbows are, she mostly acts as a helper of other gods, so she comes in at the bottom of this ranking. But Iris is just a solo act. How about a divine tag team? Number 19. The Horai. The Horai are the goddesses of the seasons and portions of time, or the hours. That might not sound especially powerful, but their responsibilities in the myths include guarding the gates of Olympus, the home to all those more powerful gods. They're also responsible for watching over the constellations and the conditions required for good farming on Earth. The 3 sisters are Eunomia, good order and good pasture, Irene, peace and spring, and Dike, justice. 3 may beat the power of 1, but can they beat the power of the sun? Number 18. Helios. Helios is the god of the sun, who drives a chariot from east to west across the sky. Hey, wait a minute, that sounds like Apollo's whole deal. Yeah, well, Helios did it first. Apollo was originally associated with more purity and radiance than with the sun itself, but over time he became associated with the sun as well. But Helios did it first, and he earned his spot on the list. He's the original Greek sun god. Speaking of which, you can't have the sun without the moon, which brings us to number 17, Selene. Selene is the goddess of the moon and sister to Helios. Like her brother, she also drives a chariot across the sky pulled by winged horses. The light of the moon is, depending on the story, a crown on her head or the folds of her shiny cloak. Other Greek goddesses are associated with the moon, including Artemis, Hera, and an upcoming entry into the ranking. But Selene isn't just a moon goddess. She was represented by ancient Greek poets as the moon itself incarnate. She's not just the goddess of the moon, she's the whole damn moon all by herself. But can she beat death? Number 16. Charon. Some viewers might not consider this next entry to be a god. To that we say he was the son of Erebus and Nyx, the primordial god and goddesses of darkness and night, respectively. You look at Charon in his shadowy face and you tell him he doesn't count. Charon has one of the most important and morbid jobs in all of Greek mythology. He's tasked with rowing the souls of the dead across the river Styx and Acheron, carrying them into the afterlife. Every person who dies winds up sitting in Charon's boat, and they can't get where they're going without him. If that's not a kind of incredible power, then what is? But what's a rowboat to a battleship? Number 15. Eris. Maybe you associate power with a more active position or with the ability to pack a real punch, harm-wise. How about Eris, the goddess of strife, discord, and rivalry? More specifically, goddess of the strife of war. Eris is frequently depicted lurking around battlefields, enjoying the sight of human bloodshed and loss. Eris is so widely disliked by the other gods and goddesses that she is the only goddess not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. She turns up anyway, and when the other gods refuse to let her in, she decides to cause some trouble among them. She took a golden apple inscribed "To the Fairest" and threw it amongst the goddesses, specifically Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena. The gift inflamed their rivalry and grew into a conflict that would end up causing the Trojan War. Eris proves that sometimes you can bring the most powerful people to their knees simply by sowing the seeds of discord. But how could hatred and strife ever stand up to the raw power of love? Number 14. Eros. Not to be confused with our previous entry on the list, Eros is the god of love, passion, and fertility. If you're not sure what's so powerful about Eros, maybe hearing the name of his latter Roman counterpart will clarify it. Cupid. That's right, using a bow and arrows or flaming torch, Eros is the one responsible for igniting love and desire in the hearts of both men and gods. When Eros falls in love with a mortal woman, Psyche, their love was so strong that they overcame Aphrodite's attempts to keep them apart. He literally beat the goddess of love, his mother, at her own game. But while Eros controls what you love, our next terrifying tag team controls what you fear. Number 13. Phobos and Deimos. You may consider including two gods as one entry cheating, but Phobos and Deimos come as a set. Sorry, they just do. They both serve as the personification of fear, with Phobos serving as the god of panic and flight, and Deimos representing terror and dread. Yes, by the way, Phobos is indeed where we get the word phobia from. The twins also sometimes represent fear of loss and are the children of Ares and Aphrodite. Their sister is Eris, and all three of them were told in the Iliad to accompany their father Ares when he sent soldiers to war. Phobos and Deimos are also described as appearing on Athena's shield, along with the face of Medusa, intended to strike terror into the hearts of Athena's enemies. If you've ever tried to reason with someone in the grip of a terrible panic, or tried to be rational in the face of irrational fear, like walking down the hall from the bathroom to your bedroom in the dark, you know just how powerful these twin forces can be. But irrational fears are one thing, what about a goddess that it's extremely rational to fear? Number 12. Enyo. Speaking of war, did you know that there is a Greek goddess of war? That's right, it's not all Ares in the war zones. He's also joined by Enyo, referred to as the sister of war by Greek poet Quintus Myrnaeus. She accompanied Ares into many of his most iconic battles and was involved in the War of the Seven against Thebes, as well as the Trojan War. Myths vary in terms of whether she is Ares' sister, wife, or daughter, but one thing is certain: if there is blood being shed, Enyo has a hand in it. Number 11. Guess who's next? Go ahead, try it. Yes, try your luck. If you get it wrong, then this next entry is not on your side. It's Tyche, the goddess of chance or luck. Just like fortune itself, Tyche can go a variety of ways, and it's depicted differently depending on that direction. Holding a rudder, she helps guide fate itself. With a ball, she represents the unsteadiness of fortune, which can go any way at any time. With a cornucopia, she symbolizes the gifts of fortune, abundance, and plentiful rewards that come to those blessed with good luck. As Pindar put it in his Olympian Ode 12, "For your hand steers the ships of the ocean on their flying course, and rules on land the march of savage wars, and the assemblies of wise counselors." But if your luck is even worse, it might not be Tyche's doing, but someone a whole hell of a lot more formidable. Number 10. Nemesis. Maybe you don't believe fortune is random. Maybe you believe that a person reaps what they sow, and what goes around comes around. Let us introduce to you Nemesis, the goddess who specializes in just desserts. Nemesis doles out divine punishment, particularly when it comes to hubris, extreme, dangerous pride, or arrogance. In the myth of Echo and Narcissus, she's the one who punishes Narcissus for his vanity, luring him to a pool, where he becomes so entranced by his own reflection that he eventually dies on the spot. The poet Mesomedes once wrote a hymn to Nemesis, calling her Nemesis, winged balancer of life, dark-faced goddess, daughter of justice. But being able to kill is one thing. What about the divine power to save? Number 9. Asclepius. As the son of Apollo and a mortal princess, Asclepius may not be considered a god by some Greek mythology enthusiasts, but he was good enough to be the patron god of the Asclepiades, an ancient order of doctors. As that might imply, Asclepius was the god of medicine and doctors. He was so mighty even as a mere demigod that he gained the ability to bring the dead back to life. His skills were so great that they violated the natural order. and Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt. Yes, he was killed by Zeus and then placed into the stars as the constellation of Fucus, but his ability to revive the dead and accomplish something that scared the hell out of the king of the gods earns him a spot on this list. But death and rebirth are only two fates of many. What about the beings who can see them all? Number 8. The Fates. When it comes to every mortal's destiny, the length of their life, and the exact moment of their death, there are 3 famous sisters who hold all the cards. Actually, they hold a golden thread and a pair of scissors. The Fates, the daughters of Nyx and either Zeus or Themis, are a package deal. Clotho, the spinner, who spins the thread of life. Lachesis, the measurer, who determines how long each thread or lifespan will be. And Atropos, the unbending inflexible, who cuts the thread when it's time for someone to die. The rule of the Fates is so ironclad that the other gods do not dare interfere when they decide someone's time is up. That applies to their pet mortals and their own mortal sons and daughters too. In a few myths, some of the gods test this, such as Apollo, who got around their verdict on a mortal by getting them drunk enough to change their minds. But aside from plying them with booze, the gods know not to cross these 3 sisters. You can try all you want, but you just can't fight fate. But would you be any more capable of fighting our next godly contestant? Number 7. Pan. Pan is one of the less intimidating gods when it comes to appearances. He's just a friendly little goat man with a flute after all. And it's true that while a lot of the other gods spend their time starting wars and cheating on Hera over and over and over and over, looking at you, Zeus, Pan tends to stick to his domain in the fields, forests, and pastures, frolicking with nymphs and playing music. But don't underestimate him. Pan is said to have a voice so fearsome that he frightened the Titans during their battle with the gods. He's also said to be gifted in the art of prophecy, so much so that he taught Apollo himself how to define the future. Mostly, he just prefers to party and startle lost travelers by suddenly appearing to them. But he's a goat god with hidden depths. Pan may be a goat, but can our next contestant claim the title of the goat? Number 6. Thanatos. Because Hades is the god of the underworld, people tend to assume that that makes him the god of death. But those people are sorely mistaken. The Greek god of death is actually Thanatos, considered to be the personification of death itself. Naturally, this makes him pretty unpopular among both mortals and gods, but that doesn't matter. Whether they like him or not, death is a constant, here to stay. As Hesiod put it in Theogony, if he should touch a man, that man is his. And even to the gods who are immortal, death is an enemy. However, despite his name bearing a striking similarity to a later powerful being, Thanatos sadly does not have his own infinity gauntlet. Our next contestant, however, is sure to blow you away. Number 5. Aeolus. Poseidon may be the god of the sea, but there is one thing in nature that can cause the tides to turn at the drop of a hat: the wind. Enter Aeolus, the god of storms and the keeper of the winds. In the Odyssey, he passed a bag along to Odysseus that contained the storm winds, which could carry him and his men home. But when Odysseus' crew opened the bag looking for treasure, they were blown all the way back to the shore of Aeolus' home. It should be mentioned that in some writings, Aeolus is not considered a god at all, but instead a mortal who was appointed as the divine keeper of the winds. In others, such as the work of Stesichorus, he is called the cousin of Iris and is therefore a god. Either way, that guy keeps a violent storm locked away and can release it whenever he wants. That's power, mortal or not. But could the power of wind help anyone escape their doom? Number 4. Moros. The gods have accomplished a lot of impossible things in their various myths. They've created storms, transformed people into animals, even cheated death. But there is one thing that can't be escaped by the certainty of its very nature, and that is doom. Doom just so happens to be the purview of Moros, the son of Nyx and the god that personifies impending doom. He can even give mortals the ability to foresee their death, though there is nothing they can do to change it. Even Zeus can't defy a decree from Moros. In the Greek tragedy Prometheus Bound, Moros is described as the all-destroying god who even in the realm of death does not set his victim free. Bleak. Speaking of inevitable. Number 3. Erebus. Erebus is the primordial god of darkness, one of the first beings to ever exist. He was the father of Hemera, goddess of the day. After the gods created the earth, Erebus finished the underworld, filling any empty space there with dark mists. He is so deeply associated with the underworld that his name is used to refer to the place where the spirits of the dead pass after leaving their bodies behind. He may have faded out of relevance, but Hades would not have his kingdom of death if it weren't for Erebus laying the underground work. But could this feisty divine emo hold a candle to the original goddess of goths? Number 2. Hecate. Zeus ruled the skies, Poseidon rules the seas, Hades rules the underworld. But there is one goddess whose domain is all three realms, the sky, the earth, and the underworld: Hecate. The goddess of witchcraft, necromancy, boundaries, and gateways. Hecate is associated with the moon and night sky, borders, city walls, crossroads on earth, and ghosts, and passage into the underworld. She was the only Titan who maintained her power under the rule of Zeus, and she was honored and respected by all gods even as they took their place on Olympus. She assisted the gods in the war against the giants, and she killed Clytius, the giant and son of Gaia, in battle. She was also known for being able to send demons and evil spirits up to earth from the underworld and to dwell among the spirits of the dead, the living, and the gods in equal measure. What can't she do? Well, things this next contestant can. Number 1. Chaos. Some descriptions consider it a goddess, others a god, and most say neither. As Aristophanes put it, at the beginning there was only chaos, night, dark Erebus, and deep Tartarus. Earth, the air, and heaven had no existence. Firstly, black-winged night laid a germless egg in the bosom of the infinite deep Erebus, and from this, after the revolution of long ages, sprang graceful Eros with his glittering golden wings, swift as the whirlwinds of the tempest. He mated in deep Tartarus with dark chaos, winged like himself, and thus hatched forth our race, which was the first to see the light. Chaos was the void before everything, the place from which all else sprang forth. Some early personified versions of chaos depict a goddess of the air and the birds that fly in it. She is the void, the parent of all primordial gods, and if creation is power, the most powerful entity in all of Greek mythology. After all, none of it would have happened without chaos. Flesh-eating horses, child-devouring witches, and of course many-headed devil dogs. Get your sword and shield ready, and I hope Athena and Fortune are on your side today, because we're coming face to face with some of the most terrifying monsters in all of Greek mythology. And we can guarantee that number 1 won't be what you expect. Number 20. Argus. Argus, a servant of Hera, was a giant whose body was covered in 100 eyes. He made for a heck of a watchman for Hera, tasked with watching over a cow that her priestess Io had been transformed into. In case you're wondering, yes, the priestess turning into a cow had something to do with Zeus and his extramarital shenanigans. The less said about that, the better. In addition to his numerous eyes, Argus was imbued with constant strength and wakefulness, able to keep his watch forever without stopping to sleep or rest. His duty was cut short when he was slain by Hermes, who disguised himself as a shepherd and shut Argus's eyes permanently. According to some versions of the story, all it took to slay Argus was a simple thrown stone, earning him his spot toward the bottom of this ranking. Still, he has an impressive legacy. Hera took Argus's eyes and transferred all of them to the tail of her favorite bird, the peacock. There, his all-seeing eyes live on. But what Argus lacked in power, our next contestant made up for in horsepower. Number 19. Mares of Diomedes. The giant Diomedes, king of Thrace, was in possession of 4 terrifying man-eating horses, known as the Mares of Diomedes. The demigod hero Heracles was tasked with stealing these mares by King Eurystheus, but he didn't know that these were no ordinary horses. Their diet of human flesh had driven them mad, and in some versions of the story they could also breathe fire. Heracles managed to complete his task by killing Diomedes and feeding him to his bloodthirsty horses. Yikes! By the way, Heracles is also conflated with a different hero, one whose name you might recognize. But to understand that, first you need to know about a really frightening kitty. Number 18. Nemean Lion. Most of the iconic monsters in Greek mythology wound up facing off against one of the most iconic heroes, Hercules, also known as Heracles in the original Greek, but we'll stick to the more recognizable name from here on out. Hercules wasn't necessarily the greatest guy. There was that whole thing where he killed his wife and all their children, for example. Disney didn't include that part in the cartoon, but he was top-notch at monster fighting. When King Eurystheus presented Hercules with 12 labors to complete, his first assignment was to slay the Nemean lion. Now this was no ordinary lion. The beast, which was terrorizing people all around Nemea, was a vicious fighter whose skin was impervious to all weapons. But where spears and swords had failed, Hercules was able to kill the lion with his guns, by which we mean his big strong arms. He grabbed hold of the lion and squeezed it until he choked it to death. Then he wore its skin as a trophy. But unlike our next contestant, lions can't attack from above. Number 17. Stymphalian birds. For his sixth labor, Hercules was tasked with taking out the vicious Stymphalian birds who had migrated to the marsh in Arcadia and decimated the crops, trees, and people there. Pausanias described the deadly birds. These fly against those who come to hunt them, wounding and killing them with their beaks. All armor of bronze or iron that men wear is pierced by the birds. But if they weave a garment of thick cork, the beaks of the Stymphalian birds are caught in the cork garment. These birds are the size of a crane and are like the ibis, but their beaks are more powerful and not crooked like that of the ibis. In addition to their extremely sharp beaks, the birds were equipped with metallic feathers they could use like weapons, and also poison dung. Gross. There's a legend that if a bird poops on you, it's good luck, but that definitely doesn't apply to these birds. If you crossed the path of the Stymphalian birds, you were pretty much flocked. Hercules was unable to enter the birds' territory directly, as the ground in the marsh where they dwelled wouldn't support his weight. Instead, Athena gifted the hero with a krotala, a bronze rattle that he shook, frightening the birds into the air. Then he was able to shoot them one by one with arrows dipped in the poisonous blood of another monster on this list. No spoilers. The birds that survived flew away and would never trouble the people of Arcadia again, unlike our next horrifying reptilian beast. Number 16. Hydra. This next monster has a good head on its shoulders. In fact, it has several. And if it ever happens to lose its head, two more grow out of the open wound in its place. That's right, we're talking about the Hydra. The Hydra was an enormous monster resembling a water snake with many heads. The exact number depends on the source, one of which could not be killed. The serpent's blood and its breath were both poisonous, and even breathing in the smell of it could potentially be deadly. For one of his labors, Hercules was tasked with slaying the Hydra, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed the help of his nephew, Iolaus. As Hercules cut off each head, Iolaus followed behind, using fire and a sword to cauterize each wound and prevent new heads from growing there. They continued this process until the only head left was the immortal one, which Hercules severed from its neck and buried beneath a heavy rock where it could do no more damage. For a little bit of extra firepower he could use during his future tasks, he dipped the tips of his arrows into the Hydra's poisoned blood. That's right, he took down the Stymphalian birds using the blood of the Hydra. That's working smarter, not harder. But there is more than one way to be a mythological horror with multiple heads. Number 15. Chimera. Up next, we have the Chimera, a hybrid monster made up of the parts of a lion, a goat, and a snake. Oh, and it can also breathe fire, in case it wasn't terrifying enough already. The Chimera was referred to in the Iliad as a bane to many men. It was known for terrorizing the residents of its homeland in Lycia. It spent its time there devouring people and presumably blasting them with its fire first to get them nice and crispy, before it was slain by the hero Bellerophon, who attacked it while riding on the back of the winged horse Pegasus. But at least you need to be close to the Chimera for it to hurt you. For some creatures, it's enough just to hear them. Number 14. Sirens. Hey, what's that sound? It sounds like beautiful music. Maybe we should get closer and see for ourselves. Wait! No! No, stop! Don't go any further! That's the enchanting voice of our next monster, the Sirens. Let's get one thing out of the way. You might have been picturing the Sirens wrong your entire life. These seductive creatures whose song lures sailors to crash their ships on treacherous rocks may live near the sea, but if you're picturing them as mermaids, you got it all wrong. They were actually bird women, with the lower bodies of birds and the heads or upper bodies of women. It makes sense when you think about it. Fish aren't exactly famous for their singing skills. The exact ratio of bird to woman varies depending on the depiction, but one aspect of the Sirens is always the same. They perched on the rocks and sang, tricking sailors into crashing their ships, ensuring that they would drown and never again reach home. Most famously, the Sirens were encountered by Odysseus on his long journey, where he managed to avoid succumbing to their song by having his men stuff their ears with wax and then tie him to the mast of the ship so he might hear their song and live. In some retellings of that story, the Sirens were so furious that a mortal man was able to hear their song and survive that they threw themselves into the sea and drowned. Now, speaking of bird women, the Sirens weren't the only part bird, part woman monsters in Greek myth. Number 13. Harpies. The Harpies, the personifications of dangerous storm winds and the servants of Zeus, would swoop down from the sky to punish anyone who had angered the gods, most often Zeus, Hera, or Athena. When someone disappeared suddenly without explanation in ancient Greece, their disappearance might have been attributed to harpies snatching them up and carrying them away to their doom. But you'd rather be carried away than eaten, right? Number 12. Polyphemus. The Cyclops or one-eyed giants are famous throughout Greek mythology, but one of them is more famous than any of the others, Polyphemus. Polyphemus is another one of the monsters encountered by Odysseus in his epic journey. The Cyclops trapped Odysseus and his 12 men in a cave, where he blocked the entrance with a giant rock. He devoured 6 of the men, eating them alive. But what Polyphemus had in brute strength, he lacked in critical thinking skills. Odysseus was able to trick the Cyclops by getting him drunk on wine, and when he had fallen asleep, the hero stabbed him in the eye with a burning stake, blinding him. Then Odysseus and his surviving men escaped by hiding beneath Polyphemus's sheep as they went out to pasture. Though blinded, the Cyclops survived the encounter with Odysseus and attempted to sink the hero's ship by hurling giant boulders at it as he and his men sailed away. But a stupid man-eater is one thing, a smarter one is far scarier. Number 11. Sphinx. The Sphinx was a female monster with a lion's body, the head and chest of a woman, the wings of an eagle, and the tail of a snake. She was known for her appetite for human flesh and an affinity for riddles. According to myth, the gods sent her to Thebes to punish the people there for something, whatever they were mad about that day probably, where she would eat anyone who failed to solve her riddle, which was taught to her by the Muses. The king of Thebes offered his throne to anyone who could defeat her, and Oedipus decided to accept the challenge. When he successfully answered her riddle, she responded reasonably by throwing herself off a mountain. By the way, in case you ever encounter a Sphinx, here's the answer to her most famous riddle. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? Why, it's man, who begins life crawling on all 4s, walks on 2 legs in adulthood, and uses a walking stick in old age. There, now you can be just like Oedipus, but only in that one aspect, we hope. Speaking of messed up parent-child relationships, number 10. Lamia. Lamia might be the closest thing that Greek mythology has to the boogeyman, a terrible monster used to frighten children into good behavior. She began as a beautiful daughter of King Belus of Libya, but after she caught the eye of Zeus and bore several of his children, Hera caught wind of the whole affair and was less than pleased. She killed all of Lamia's children except for one, who is featured later on this very list. At least that's one version of the story. In another, even more upsetting version, Hera forced Lamia to kill her own children. The grief and rage caused by this act transformed Lamia into a half-snake, half-woman monster who dwelled in a cave and emerged to steal babies and children from all the homes, devouring them. Better be good, kids, or Lamia will slither into your room and eat you alive. But hey, at least you're not being eaten alive in a dark, scary maze. Number 9. Minotaur. Animal-human hybrids are pretty common throughout Greek mythology, and one of the most famous of all time is the part bull, part man Minotaur. Born of the unholy union between Queen Pasiphae and a white bull, the Minotaur was kept in a labyrinth where King Minos would send 7 Athenian men and 7 Athenian women to be sacrificed to the beast on a regular basis. Some versions say once a year, others say every 9 years. The Minotaur's reign of terror continued until Theseus defeated it with help from Princess Ariadne. The Minotaur is now dead. Whew, our next monster isn't. Number 8. Impusa. Like Lamia, Impusa was another female monster that preyed on humans while they slept. This shape-shifting creature would take on different forms depending on what she wanted to do. If she was trying to frighten travelers, one of her favorite activities, she would appear as a grotesque monster with legs made from bronze and cow dung. If she wanted to feed on the blood of young men, she would take on the shape of a beautiful woman. She would also sometimes take on the shape of a cow, a mule, or a dog. No matter what shape she took, she was not the type of being you wanted to cross paths with, at least if you wanted to keep all your blood inside your body. Some monsters attack while you sleep, others are so strong they can only be attacked while they sleep. Number 7. Colchian Dragon. During Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece, he encountered the monster that was tasked with guarding it in the sacred grove of Ares, the Colchian Dragon. This massive beast was so powerful, it was thought to mean certain death for Jason when he faced it. But with the help of the sorceress Medea, he put it to sleep and managed to slay the dragon. Even in death, it still posed a threat though. Its teeth were taken out of its mouth by the king and sown in a sacred field. There, they caused a group of stone soldiers to spring up from the earth and attack Jason. Sure, he managed to defeat those too, but how many monsters can still hurt you even after they've been killed? Number 6. Scylla. Oh, would you look at that, Odysseus is here again. The next two monsters on our list come as a set, and were among the horrors faced in the hero's odyssey. First, there was Scylla, a beast with 12 feet and 6 heads on long serpentine necks. Each head had 3 rows of sharp teeth, which she used to snap up her prey from within her cave whenever they got too close. She devoured 6 of Odysseus's men as his ship passed by her, but she shared those treacherous waters with another monster. Number 5. Charybdis. Charybdis dwelled on the shores across from Scylla, where she would drink up and spit out the waters 3 times a day, creating a vicious whirlpool. Together, they made it nearly impossible to make it through the waters alive. Odysseus managed to after being shipwrecked, only by holding onto a tree for dear life for hours until Charybdis spat up a raft she had swallowed. But what do you find more frightening, water or snakes? Number 4. Echidna. Echidna was another half-woman, half-snake, but she was far more than just that. Hesiod described her as a flesh-eating monster who was not like mortal men, nor was she like the undying gods, but was something else entirely. She was ageless with a taste for raw human flesh, and spent her time lurking in a cave and preying on humans that were unfortunate enough to wander into her domain. She and her lover bore some truly nightmarish children together, including the Gorgons, the Chimera, and the Colchian dragon. And that's not even close to all of them either. According to Apollodorus, she hunted humans for many, many years until her reign of terror was cut short by Argus, who killed her while she slept. And who could have expected Argus to come back? Talk about a plot twist. Number 3. Cerberus. The 12th and final labor of Hercules, the most dangerous one of all, was to travel into the underworld and kidnap Cerberus, the beast that guarded the gates of the land of the dead. The many-headed dog was a horrible sight to behold, with a serpent for a tail and the heads of snakes all over its back. Some accounts said that he had more than 3 heads, going up as high as 50. Hesiod described the hellish hound in Theogony like this: a monster not to be overcome and that may not be described, Cerberus who eats raw flesh, the brazen-voiced hound of Hades, 50-headed, relentless, and strong. He also described Cerberus's role as the ultimate guard dog. As people go in, he fawns on all, with actions of his tail and both ears, but he will not let them go back out, but lies in wait for them and eats them up when he catches any going back through the gates. Once he arrived in the underworld, Hercules met with Hades, the god of the underworld, and he agreed that Hercules could take the beast with him if he managed to overpower Cerberus with nothing but his own 2 hands and no other weapons. Hercules did indeed wrestle Cerberus into submission, though he sustained a bite from the serpent tail in the process. Unlike the Nemean lion, Cerberus was not killed in the fight. He was taken to Eurystheus alive and was later returned safely to his home in the underworld. Unlike the other monsters that Hercules faced off against, Cerberus survived the encounter without so much as a scratch. Soon after, he resumed his post and presumably got some nice scratches behind the many pairs of ears from Persephone for being such a good boy. But let's now go from a bad boy to a really scary girl. Number 2. Medusa. No list of monsters would be complete without the woman whose mere gaze can turn a man into solid stone. Medusa. Crowned with hair made of writhing, hissing snakes, she struck terror into the hearts of all men throughout ancient Greece. In one of the most famous versions of her myth, Medusa was assaulted by Poseidon in the temple of Athena and then punished by the goddess for the violation. She was then transformed into a monster that we all know today. Eventually, she was defeated by the hero Perseus with the help of the gods, but her powers persisted even after death. Her severed head, according to one version of the legend, was placed in Athena's shield and used to paralyze opponents on the battlefield with fear. If there is one monster from Greek myth that everyone knows, it's Medusa. So why isn't she number 1 on the list? Who could have possibly edged out the iconic Gorgon from the number 1 spot? Well, it's number 1, Typhon. How about the father of all the monsters? This is the entity that created the Gorgons, Cerberus, Scylla, the Nemean lion, the Sphinx, and several other entries on this very list. Typhon, the son of Gaia and Tartarus, is the largest and most powerful monster in Greek mythology. The giant monster had wings, snake heads in place of its hands, and a lower body made from even more coiled snakes. His eyes were made of fire, and he spat fiery stones from his horrible mouth. Some descriptions of him state that he spat poison instead, which he also emitted from his hair. Apollodorus described him like this: down to his thighs he was human in form, but of such immense size that he rose higher than all the mountains and often even scraped the stars with his head. With arms outstretched, he could reach the west on one side and the east on the other, and from his arms there sprang 100 dragons' heads. Below his thighs he had massive coils of vipers, which, when they were fully extended, reached right up to his head and emitted violent hisses. He had wings all over his body, and filthy hair springing up from his head and cheeks floated around him in the wind, and fire flashed from his eyes. So, yeah, pretty intimidating. It takes two to tango, of course, and Typhon didn't father all those children by himself. He had a wife, Echidna, who was also featured on this list. But while Echidna was slain by Argus, Typhon was not killed. Well, he was in one version of the story, but most takes on the myth agree that he survived. He battled Zeus himself and lived to tell the tale. He was imprisoned in Tartarus, or beneath the land of the Arimoi. There, beneath the ground, his rage shook the earth and caused volcanoes to erupt, terrorizing humanity even from within his eternal prison. Without Typhon, humanity would have had far fewer monsters to fight, so that earns him the place as the big daddy of them all. Now check out Soldiers Encounter Mysterious Monsters in Vietnam War, or watch this instead.